to another episode of the Raw Knowledge Podcast with myself, your host, as ever, Alex Connor. And today I'm here with Christine Envall. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good, and thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure.
A pleasure, and it's also, I've been watching your clips for International Protein, so it's actually a pleasure to meet you because your personality comes across, and we've been enjoying that part of our social media.
Yeah, which is probably a good point, actually, because the folks listening, that's how we kind of met, right?
Yep.
We come on board with International Protein as one of the athletes, so we've been doing some more education around that, and we're going to do some stuff on your podcast soon, which is going to be really exciting.
Yeah, which we're very excited about bringing that back, Muscle Talk. But it's great to meet you because I can see from what you put forward that you're very much on the same wavelengths as me in terms of your, nutrition and education and, not really kind of being into all that bro science and fads and stuff. So I think we'll be having an interesting chat.
Oh yes, absolutely. We'll definitely will do. It's good because with this like filtered era with everything or over filtered, it's really hard to kind of get to the nuts and bolts, and it is confusing for a lot of people. So it's always refreshing when you meet someone who's like, okay, look, let's kind of get to the truth. Let's talk about things that are factual, that actually work without all of the gloss and the glamour or the smoke and mirrors, shall we say.
Exactly.
So I guess for people listening, apart from what we've alluded to, International Protein, if someone was to ask you who you are and what you do, how would you give us a bit of a synopsis if you wanted to introduce yourself to the listeners and the watchers, of course?
Okay, it's a tough one because obviously before International Protein, or maybe not obviously because it's 2022 now, I was a professional bodybuilder with the IFBB. Obviously was an amateur before that. I was also a NABBA competitor, amateur way back in the day. 3 Miss World titles in female bodybuilding. That's what transitioned me into the IFBB pro ranks. Competed up until about 2015 when injuries kind of came a cropper, but that's all been at the same time as doing International Protein. So competing professionally, doing International Protein have kind of been the two biggest parts of my life. But leading into that, and I guess, and I'm kind of walking backwards and sideways and everything here, my formal education is as a food scientist, food science and nutrition,
right.
which was actually triggered by my interest in bodybuilding. So everything kind of interlinks, so it's very hard to separate, one part from another. So I guess I'm a food scientist, professional bodybuilding business owner, and now, my interest kind of leads into more middle-aged muscle and, people over 40 getting into weights or having done it all their life and realizing that the benefits of actually staying active and eating right can actually negate a lot of the things which we just took for granted as being natural aging. They're not actually natural. That was actually all neglect. And that if we actually took care of ourselves, we can do things for a lot longer than what we maybe anticipated or what we saw our parents do. So that's probably where I'm at the moment, is still using all of those skills, but to kind of move into that space of education and, things which help people over 40 maintain their level of physical activity and fitness.
No, that's great. It's a good, and there's sort of 3 parts I'd love to delve into there. Before I do, I want to sort of go back to the start to set the scene, but it's like the International Protein side of things in the business realm.
Yeah.
There's your career as a professional athlete and getting to that, and obviously your interest in education as a food scientist, which I'm incredibly passionate about, so I'll try not to talk about that the whole time. And I think that's why we'll get on really well, because
yes, you're the exercise side and I'm kind of the nutrition side, and the two things,
it coincides, right? And nutrition is an area that I love so much, but it's also so confusing these days. People are always asking me, like, technically I'm a nutritionist as well, but it's like, well, yeah, okay, well, there's that many qualifications, and it's like, to what level and to what degree, and then people are like, what's the difference between a dietitian and this and that? But anyway, age is a disease we're all dying from, right? In terms of anti-aging is the biggest thing, and
because quality of life is really the most important thing. Like, who wants to live to 90 if for 30
shit.
years of that you're bedridden or not able to move freely or do the things that you wanted to do? And I think that's a key thing that comes through with a lot of people that I talk to in that space, is that I want to be able to do the things that I did at 25, maybe not to the same degree,
but you want to do them well.
Exactly.
Feel good about it.
Yeah, rather than have to be thinking, oh, well, that was in my younger days, or, reminisce back to the times when I was able to do this and do that. But you can actually do all of those things. And, some people are finding that they're even better now in their 40s because they were in a different space in their life and in exercise, and physical activity wasn't a thing that they did in their 20s. They were maybe out partying or just, doing whatever. And they've realized that they're actually feeling better, being better by taking care and I say just by keep moving. Keep moving, eat right, keep moving.
Well, it's even neurologists have agreed that the best things for anti-aging to date is strength training and nutrition.
Yes.
In terms of, because people always, there's a lot of drugs like metformin and things like that bantered around, but I think, again, people are sort of looking for that magic pill. It's like, but a supplement to food is like, what is the definite? It's something to aid and maintain or add or bridge a gap. It's not to be the whole in general. And I think people miss the forest for the trees there. But Frank Zane, old school bodybuilder, one of my favorites. My dad was a big fan of him and passed on his sort of book, and I read them as a young child. And it was great because he talked a lot about how he believed that his quality of life and his physique was actually better in his 40s. And a lot of people are like, well, how can that be? But I think, like you said, it comes down to that education, where a lot of people are messing themselves up in the early days by maybe going too hard too soon, or they're not able to do things that are sustainable. I don't know, and looking back and looking at what he did and kind of taking the good from the bad, and I was like, well, you know what, he's got a point here about he's very holistic in his approach, right? He was very three-dimensional. It wasn't all about training, even down to language, things like that.
That's the thing. Like, can never be about one thing, because everything is working in this like three-dimensional matrix. So you can train, and I'm going to make it really, really basic to the point of, you can train exactly the same all year round, but you can at point in time have abs, and at other points in time not have abs. It's not just the training, it's the diet that goes along with that. And any person who's a bodybuilder really knows that cyclic phase of what they're doing. Like, maybe they're doing a little bit more cardio, but their weight training is basically the same. And I'll tell you a little bit of story, because I just love digressing all over the place over here.
This is what we're about on this podcast, long form content, people.
The first time, it would be in my second World Championships. I went to Spain, and this was the first time that South Africa had sent a bodybuilding team to compete.
What year was this, just out of interest?
1998.
Right, okay.
1998, so just take you back there in time. You go back in the time machine.
No, it's good, I like it.
So that's why, I mean, South Africa had been, I guess, out of apartheid a long time, but they hadn't had an active bodybuilding community that actually travelled to world events. So this was their first time, and no one was in condition. They were all big. There's some big boys and some big girls, but everyone was smooth.
And this was still like pro division?
This was World Championship amateurs.
Right.
So it was NABA, back when I was doing NABA. And I, that was one of my best shows as an amateur. I won the overall at that show for the second time. I'm going to say I looked friggin' amazing, because I look back at my photos
I've
and I'm like,
seen your photos. You are very predisposed to building muscle.
Yes.
To genetics, I think you've definitely got some, like, you did on your side there.
Yeah, I do change very quickly.
Yeah.
I can change an exercise, and a week later I can see a difference. So,
yeah.
But digressing back to this story, after you go out, you have some food, you meet the other countries and relax in that. And the guys on the South African team were like, how long did it take you to train to get like that? And I'm like, well, okay, I've been training for 10 years. They're like, no, but we mean to get lean like that. And we're like, what do you mean? How long do I train? Like, it's the diet. And they're like, diet? What do you mean diet? and that was kind of when we realized that they'd been looking at magazines.
Yes.
And they had, and because they didn't have the input from other countries, and people remember this is pre-social media. Really, it was kind of pre-internet as well. Like,
everyone wasn't really looking at that.
Yeah, like we still had to wait, maybe a couple of months for the magazine to come out to get the information of the results of the competition that had happened, 2 months ago. So this is an era when communication wasn't as free and information wasn't as freely available as what it is now. So these guys, it wasn't until they went to that level of competition and then they like realized and started talking like, oh my God, you guys actually do like a diet phase, a cutting phase to get ready to get your abs. So essentially they just trained and figured that was just how you looked from eating and training, and they just kind of figured, okay, we need to train another 5 years and we'll look like that.
So they thought it was like a permanent state that you could achieve
exactly.
lower body fat percentiles by increasing muscle tissue. But,
didn't realize, and that's 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, that was that mindset for them. But then the next year they came back and they friggin' were shredded and dominated.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? In terms of like we look at the standard of shows now, and it was like when like shredded glutes or like glute striations when we look at the upper echelons of bodybuilding, because obviously that's not the goal for every competitor, depending on the category. We've got so many categories now.
Yeah,
but it was like, wow, when that first came, I was like, this person's got lines on their glutes. Now it's like, you ain't shredded if you've not got lines. It's sort of like, I believe like it's like we've got different benchmarks.
It definitely, I mean, everything does progress, and even within your own self, like, you should do that anyway when you're competing. If you've got lines in your chest for your comp, you should have those lines in your chest 4 weeks out at your next comp.
Correct.
That's how you progress, having that kind of benchmark of, I want to improve on that. But definitely, like, if you really go back in time, and people had like only the major cuts in their quads, and then, feathering becomes the thing. And it is a little bit, what you get exposed to, because again, going back in time, when I was competing out of Victoria, Victorians were known for being shredded because that was the culture of the Victorian competitions, that what got marked up, very much kind of spearheaded by Tony Doherty, when he was running the comps down there, because that's what he liked. So he would encourage the competitors to get super shredded. You go up to Sydney and they liked the big dudes. They weren't always the best condition, but they just loved the muscle size. So you'd come up with the nationals and there'd be the big so shredded guy and then the little shredded Victorian guys, and it's like, okay, who's going to win? And it really did come down to that personal preference. But bodies, there's a fashion, I believe, to what's in style in terms of what muscle group is shredded, or even just what look, and then that is kind of supported by the way that divisions like wellness are coming in, where it's all about the big booty. I grew up in an era when women weren't supposed to have butts, like they was like, oh God, I'm going to try to hide that. If you had a big butt, it was terrible. You had to try to lose it. And that's a little bit cultural. But then again, with the sharing of social media, what becomes more popular, and then the fact that they now have a division which enhances the fact that, okay, that's for women with big glutes and legs. And obviously men's physique is for guys with no legs and big shoulders, and there's trends around how we look, whether it's I think like Dorian Yates kind of was really the man who cemented having a big back, because up until then the bodies were not, they didn't have that extreme shock factor, and the backs weren't like so developed. And now there's different muscle groups continue to be the ones which kind of get augmented, and like say, like, what's the definition of being shredded? Okay, if you don't have shredded glutes, don't step on stage. Or you might have everything else shredded, but people are going to ignore that if you don't have that particular thing. And at one point in time it was abs, everything was judged off of the abs. Now I don't know, they don't have abs, they just kind of have like stomachs and
they've gone a bit too far with it, which I think that, we'll get onto that, but it's been addressed. It's like, I think that's why the classic physique's almost coming back a little bit more now. It's like there's a point where, can we get, like, anatomically, can we get that much bigger, and can we anatomically get leaner? Well, once you're at, people quote being 2% body fat, what all this, it's like, when you're getting down there, you're in hospital. Do you know what I mean? So I'm like, my coach is Dr. Joe Klemzeski. I don't know if you know Dr. Joe, but he was back in the, he's got more pro cards than any coach going. Yeah. He's like, he was the initial godfather of, let's not cut water for competitions, because we know that we need cellular volume in here, and if and why and how, and to the point where, and then he coached Lane Norton and all these coaches. So it's funny because a lot of people don't know about him, but he was like the protagonist to all of this. Okay. Because again, he was reading these magazines, and he had coaches, and they were like, you have to do this magazine thing. And he's like, yeah, but, and he was studying nutrition. He's like, yeah, but hang on, like, this doesn't make sense. So then he started doing it differently. He got his own pro card. He was coaching people. And then he got IFBB pros, which was, this is really interesting, saying, can you coach me? But I am not going to advertise you. I'm going to still pay my coach. I'm going to pay you. Now, these days, he doesn't allow that. He's like, no, like, he coaches IFBB. He coaches everybody. Because even the guys who were enhanced were like, hang on, they're like, this guy's getting people absolutely just shredded. And how? And he was like, well, like, it's not magic, but this is kind of pragmatic what you need to do. And now it's interesting how people are just still people. I see people almost fainting on the stage. I'm like, what? Because they're depriving themselves of water and these fats, and it's really sad. Yeah, and they're fucking their conditioning up. And I'm like, you can't even pose, let alone look shredded. You know what I mean?
And I think that, I guess I don't want to get onto a negative cycle or anything, but it is a problem with coaches who don't have any kind of training in science, let alone medicine, or pharmacology or anything that they're actually working in.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
And the thing with the water side of things, that was, I remember first year uni when we were doing, and I'm trying to remember whether it was organic or which particular chemistry, because we had to do all organic, physical, and one other one which I can't even remember what it was now, but we were talking basically about the cell gradients and the sodium being outside of the cell, more potassium inside, still having both, but the ratio of which they existed to either draw more water into the cell or push it out of the cell, and
give you that look.
and I'm just sitting there going, oh, this is so exciting for being able to peak for a bodybuilding show.
No, everyone else is just like, from a health end, they don't know, them just like, I can use this shit,
I'm like, this is interesting, and even just things like from a sodium depletion point of view, like how much sodium is stored within your body, that to actually really deplete your body of sodium takes about 6 months or 4 to 6 months. But it's so needed in so many places that you kind of don't want to do that.
No, and it gets a bad rap. I thought salt was bad. I'm like...
In the wrong spot, in the wrong time, in the wrong amount. It's wrong, but it's also so right at the right time.
Yeah,
in the right ratio.
It's still essential in some quantities.
And it is more about the ratio, like the potassium to sodium ratio and where it's going to pull that water to is so important.
It's like the whole zealot when someone wakes up after, say, eating a McDonald's or a pizza, and like, I looked better than I did on comp day. And that's obviously something there has happened chemically, but they don't specifically know. Like, they don't know mechanistically what made them look good. They just think, oh, it was the pizza. It's like, no. It was at some point, maybe you had enough glycogen, you had enough hydration, enough potassium and sodium, you had enough time, and you just happened to wake up, and you were, like, probably really low stress, you had a great sleep, and it was just like, boom! Why get another comp day? It's like... But then, again, it's that's the thing with nutrition. People are looking at the theme rather than the mechanism, is what I often think about. So they go, oh, it's this set of foods. It's like, no... What's in the foods and how do they interact with the body and the dosage and the time and what else is going on?
And I think that you've really hit the nail on the head there with the what else is going on, because there's a couple of things that stand out in my mind. One of them was Chris Cormier, which hopefully everyone remembers who he was, because he's one of the most incredible pro bodybuilders of his time. Still coaches and trains a lot of people today actually all around about the place. But he said at one point in time, someone said, do you deplete for a competition? And he said, depends how I look coming into that show. Like, if I'm on the money, I'm already body fat's down.
Yeah.
I'm not going to deplete. I'm just going to coast through into that show. He goes, if I'm feel like I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball, then I will do a depletion. So I'm like, okay, I always remembered that. But then to actually see it in practice, there was, I don't know if anyone remembers Guy Grundy. So he was an Aussie guy. He went over to the States. He now does acting and all kinds of stuff. But he used to compete in ABBA with us, and he did one competition, and he come into that show like he'd been in condition for probably 3 weeks prior. He was so depleted and super shredded.
Right.
He went into that comp and he was able to eat whatever. Like, he was eating up from probably 3-4 days before the comp. Looked amazing.
Sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, okay, that's what I need to do. Then the next show he didn't come into it in the same extreme condition of depletion. And I think that's the thing that they think, okay, that's the method. But if you haven't given your body a reason to be so stressed to have that uptake of nutrients, then you're kind of coming into it just at a medium level, and then everything that you load on top kind of can smooth you out, and that's when you end up with those. Hence
why peak week isn't magic. People think, peak week, and I'm like, if you ain't shredded, peak week ain't gonna do it. The work has to be done prior.
Yeah.
Again, probably. I've got to say, before we continue on, let's kind of quickly go back. How did you get into lifting, and was there any people or events that inspired you? And then we'll kind of jump back to that, because I just think that would be interesting to know. Like, was it something by chance? Was it your father? Was it your mother? Like, was there someone? Because you love this stuff, so
yeah. It was. There's a bit of a long story to it. So before I started lifting, I had a lot of issues with food. I was anorexic. I would say I did a stint in hospital because I didn't like eating. I didn't want to have size. And actually at that point in time...
Was this when you were like very, very young?
14. Yeah, around that age. I mean, I started lifting at 16, 15 going on 16. So it was kind of all in that space of time. I even remember in PE, we actually did a section on weightlifting, and I literally refused to do it.
Because you didn't want to be like, you just wanted to stay small.
Yeah,
Was it like a
I
bit
don't
of
wanna...
body dysmorphia in terms of like, you're like, I can't get big at all?
Yeah, and that was like a total lack of understanding of what muscle actually does for you and how... Because what it actually worked out, it was I didn't actually have an issue with being big so much as I actually didn't like body fat. That was kind of what it actually got diagnosed as. So I guess that really played into being a bodybuilder. But at the time, until I figured all of that stuff out, I didn't want to do weights, didn't want to put anything that I was size or anything like that. But then I had a friend of mine who I'm going to say she was like a serial anorexic. She was in and out of hospitals constantly. And they were looking for something for her that would kind of give her permission to eat. And that's what weight training did. Like the exercise was like the permission to eat. And if you understand the psychology of anorexia, a lot of it's about control and permission and everything. So she went to the gym and she was very, very skinny when she went. And we had English class together and she'd come into the class and she'd like flex this little bicep. And it started off like a little pea. Like literally it didn't start out like a normal bicep, just small. It literally, there was
like
this
a
thing, a pea in the middle of her arm.
Huh.
It's like a little pea. Then it grew into a marble. And then it kind of grew into a golf ball size. And then it kind of grew into an egg size. So this little muscle was just kind of like growing on her arm.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by it. She's like, oh, you should come train. Like, you should try out the gym. So I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Like, let's go along, Okay. So we bought leotards and, cruised on in and did all these little circuits. And, our first program was actually a circuit. It wasn't the traditional set type training that you see now. It was literally like whole body, about 12 exercises, do it once, and then, build up to doing it twice, build up to doing it 3 times, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
But it was, I was in a country town, and there was a guy who was, he's about our age, and he was like 16 or something, and he was going to do a teenage show. So, to us, he looked massive, and he was all like muscly and getting lean and everything, and my friend had a crush on him. So we thought, we'll go watch him compete. We'll go see what this is all about. And conned my mum into driving us an hour to watch this show. Anyone who knows anything about bodybuilding comps, teenage division's up first. He's on, off, we wanted to leave. Yeah. And my mum's like, I've driven you here, you're going to stay and watch this whole show. Yeah. So we're like, oh, okay. And then we saw the women. And that was like, both of us were kind of like, hey, that's really cool. Like, they had little abs and little biceps and they were flexing and stuff. So it was actually more her idea than mine. Right. But we went back to the gym on the Monday and we were like, we want to be bodybuilders. And the guy who coached the teenage guy, he's like, okay, I'll change your program up. And he started to, encourage us to read the magazines and structured our program so that we were kind of doing sets. So, obviously anyone who doesn't know the difference, like a circuit is when you might do one set of each body part and move through that. Whereas set training, obviously you do all your muscle group together, but you'll do, say, 3 or 4 sets of one exercise, then move to the next exercise. So just in case anyone didn't know that.
Yeah, for sure.
So they moved us over to, bodybuilding style training and also introduced the concept of progressive overload, which is something which I just assumed everybody knew. But I've done a few programs for people recently, again, in that, over 40s space, and they've never done progressive overload. And so that essentially, it's counterintuitive when you're 16 years old to think that I'm going to get more tired, but you're going to make me do more weight. So we thought the guy was mad, but... But hey, he knew he'd put muscles on this guy, so we figured he must kind of know what he was doing. And I literally have used progressive overload probably as my main principle forever. Like that, just doing it. Obviously, and again, I'll just go into that briefly. Starting off on your first set of 10, 12 reps on a weight which is relatively comfortable, going up and doing around 10 reps on a weight which is making you work. Third set is you really had to put some work in to get those 10, maybe 8 reps, and then your last set being maybe you'll fail at 6, maybe you need a spot depending on what exercise, but you're not going to get 10. If you're getting 10 on that last set, it's time to go up in weight. So and that was always how I gauged how I was going to progress and overload. As soon as if I'm getting even 8 reps on my last set of that heavier weight, that then becomes my third set weight, everything moves up and I get a new 4th set weight. So that was literally how I built all of my size over the years. But that was maybe, very, very fortunate that we got taught that principle from the get-go.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Sort of fuck around, for lack of better words, for many years.
Many years.
Because they sort of avoid like at some point it's like train hard. It's like, yes, it's an oversimplification, but a lot of people, it's like we use the concept of RPE now, which was created by like Mike Toucher, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is failure and 1 is super easy. We want to be like, yeah, maybe it's a 7 and an 8, but we go to 9, and then there's time and a place for failure. But people think they're hitting failure, but I'm like, well, on a safe exercise, let's try. And then they get 5, 6, 7, 8 more, and they're like, oh, and I'm like, so now where do you think everything else of your training has been? Subpar to causing damage. So I think at some point, it just, people don't like to be uncomfortable, but we also must understand that it's like you go in the gym, that weight was heavy, but people really don't understand the concept of how your body adapts. So I'm like, there's going to be some neurological and physiological and even mental changes between now and even next week. So when you come in, that weight actually might feel lighter. In the early days, you know how it is. It's great.
Yeah.
To be a beginner again, in terms of the progression, you know? Like, every session.
Yeah, give me more.
Yeah, where now it's like, maybe we get a little here, a little bit there. We're going to change this.
Quarter on.
Yeah, but it's so true. Because it's simple. It's complex, but it's simple at the same time. Do you know what I mean?
And I think that's where having, like, and again, back in the day, there were no coaches or whatnot. You know, you're lucky if you fell in with someone who knew kind of what they were doing, who could push you and know you to push you. So some of it is, you know, mental outlook. You've got to want it. Like, you've got to want more. So I'm not naturally that person, but I'll work hard. So I was fortunate to have people who would push me and be able to kind of judge sometimes, like, oh, look, you know, you're being a little bit slack. Like, you know, you can do more. Yes. And then it almost becomes a habit that you learn of actually wanting to progress and wanting to do more and really attacking it. But it's mental. And I always say that to people, that so many times I would go in the gym when I was training at my peak, and because people say, oh, weights is boring and you know, it's just, and I'm thinking, well, you're not doing it properly, because obviously to me it is one of the most difficult things mentally. It's hard. Because if I wasn't mentally focused on that weight, I tell you, it was not going to move. Like, I swear a lot of the time that the weight was literally moving with my mind and my focus of just like, you know, I'm imagining my bicep pulling that weight up because I was working so high above what my natural ability really was, like, especially because I, you know, measure it against how I train now, and I don't really go outside of my comfort zone because something's probably going to break.
Especially when it comes to, I think, training legs as well. Like, just to use a quick example, I think about Tom Platz, you know, he's renowned for his legs. Yeah. Or even you look at the simplicity of a program, like, people are always astonished at my program, and they're like, is that it? I'm like, yep. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, because people want programs to be complex and they want to do exercises that are novelty and they want things to change very often. But I'm like, the progression exists within the programming in terms of why change an exercise if you've, you know, learned the skill, keep going with it. So, I mean, people look and I go, right, now come train. And then when I train people go, and I don't just kill people. There's a way to, you know, you can't do that. I'm not into that. I think
because that's counterproductive.
Yeah, I don't like when people, I'm like, you have to earn the right to train at a certain level, and it takes time. Like, you can't just go in there and start moving big weights, because we use the analogy of a car. You put 1,000 brake horsepower in a car, you don't upgrade the brakes, you don't upgrade the wastegates or stabilizers, all these other things. I'm like, you're gonna fuck it. So you have to kind of get to that level. Also, someone mentally can't deal with that stress, but a lot of people are not training hard enough. So I'm like, yes, you're doing these 4 or 5 exercises, that might not seem a lot because you've been doing 10, but I'm like, you are literally just doing garbage volume. Just a quick one, guys, before we carry on with the podcast. For any of you who are interested in taking your health and physique to the next level, and you want to remove the guesswork, you're not quite getting the progress that you want, you're not seeing what you want to see in the mirror, and you're not feeling like you're really moving in the right direction, then click the link in the bio below, the apply button, where you can contact me. We can organize a free consultation, no obligation, and discover whether it's a good fit as coach and client. All right, back to it. Now let's set it up. Let's get the technique right. Let's not swing on weights. Let's now actually push the weight up. Let's actually go to discomfort, to true failure, not mental failure, mechanistic failure sometimes, depending on the exercise. But that really elucidates in my mind, and for a lot of people, like, shit, I'm like, yeah, you've been leaving a lot on the table. It's not hard, but again, like you said, it's like to go in and know that you're like, that last leg day, and I've got to repeatedly do that. It's like at that level, especially when you're getting into that intermediate advanced, you're like, I've just got to do it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with the programming as well. Like you said, it's within the programming. I always figured, how do you know if you've progressed if you're literally changing your exercises every week? Because as you said, one, that you have to learn the motor skill of doing that particular exercise, and that's to do it efficiently and to do it well. It's not like, and that's the thing, people think weights is easy, but if it's so easy, how come I see 90% of the people ever training wrong because they don't understand what it is that, or you're not aware of what your body's doing at that time. So one, you've got to actually learn it, but then you have to benchmark it, and then you can progress. So if you're, and even I would find going from a different gym, even though the weights say that that's, 40 kilos and the gym over there says it's 40 kilos, it feels different at a different gym. Sometimes it feels lighter and sometimes it feels heavier. And that's possibly the mental side of it, but it can be those little things about the ergonomic of the dumbbell or the padding on the bench.
Absolutely.
So many things around that. So that's one aspect of it. And that was one of the things with our programs, or what I did in the day was I had an essential, a program, but I don't ever remember changing my program other than I would look back, say, in 9 months and realize that most of the exercises were different, but I was still doing chest because we'd only ever change one thing at a time.
Correct. It's like those little progressions all the time.
Yeah, morph one in, morph one out. Okay, might switch, incline barbell press for some dumbbells, but the barbell stays on the flat bench or something like that. So that was how things progressed, but it really, so you knew go into the gym knowing what your targets were. At one point in time,
writing it down and tracking it, old school,
knowing
what you're doing.
At one point in time, I was writing it down. By the time I was writing to it, it was so in my head that I was not going to forget what I'd done the week before. Like there was absolutely no way that was going to happen. But I did keep a book for about 3 or 4 years.
It's nice, and
so
because it builds the habit
exactly
and the behaviour. And I think that's why, because I remember, I don't want to track something. And,
no,
that was initially in the early days, and then my coach and my boss at the time, the first gym when I was 16, and he was SAS, big dude, and he's like, do you track nutrition? I'm like, no. He's like, how do you know what you're putting in if you know, how do you know what you're getting out if you know? So, and I was like, oh, and then I started, and I got all this progress. I'm like, oh, that was magic. It's like, it wasn't. It was just being accountable and being able, well, if I did this exercise last week and I did this many reps at this weight, can I do a little bit more? It's like, it's so simple, but that's where it starts.
Exactly.
And obviously there's a lot more to that over time, but again, I love the way you explain it because it's not that difficult. The difficulty is within it, and I use that same example as you said before, where 90% of people in the gym, I always say when I'm onboarding a new client, people come to me and I said, look, and this is the same when I'm coaching someone online and setting expectations. I'm like, look, this is not going to be anything magic. It's going to be very anticlimactic for you, but you're going to need to give me feedback. And the difference is going to be the way you execute. Now, I don't want to put it on a pedestal, but I'm like, skill acquisition and technique is key. I said, and here's the black and it's white. I'm like, okay, if this isn't the case, let's go in any gym, anywhere in the world right now. I said, we go in here, EMF, we're sat outside. And I said, how many people, if we strip everyone, right, and they laugh, and I'm like, looks like they lift. I said, or to any degree, right? And then let's not even talk about rest and nutrition. I'm like, not many. I'm like, okay. I said, and is everyone doing the exercises? Like, really? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, yeah, they're all doing them, right? Because they're all there. It's like, there's no secret room with some secret exercises and then layouts. So I'm like, so what's the difference then? The difference is manipulating muscle, knowing how to position joints and activate, and being aware of how to, if you have a basic awareness of biomechanics and physiology, how to get as much as you can out of it. Because like you said, most people are on exercises and they're just going through the motions, or you think they're not even using the back there and this, but you don't know what you don't know. So it's not their fault, but at some point, you have to be your own parent and go, well, are you just pissing your money away? Because if I was going to a place and not getting results, after a while I go, well, people go, but I'm having fun. I said, you'll be delirious with it when you get results. Then you'll be having fun.
Then you'll take fun to a new level.
Exactly.
But I had that experience where a friend of mine had purchased a Kai Green training program, and he's like, is it a good program? And I looked at it and I went, any program's a good program, really.
Yes. But
how are you going to actually do it?
Correct.
And, like you obviously work through with your clients. I say that too. I'm very close to Brandon Ray, and his training is his jam. Like he dreams of new exercises and new techniques and everything, and he now has to get his clients to video how they do the exercise. Absolutely. Because he says that he'll explain it, do it, and then the technique will be off. He's like, even though he'll send a video of how to do it, and it's like they find a way of doing it different, because again, until you video yourself back, a lot of the time you don't know how you're doing it.
Correct.
And again, that's why back in the day I always had a training partner who could check me. because, you know, I think I'm doing this, but I'm actually doing something totally different, or my foot's turned the wrong way, or I'm uneven, or something. You're not aware necessarily, but you will, through body positioning and habit, learn where you are. But you do need that person to kind of, I think, be there and kind of say, okay, no, you didn't take that back as far as what you thought you did. You're moving it like literally that far. So there's all of those things going into it. But yeah, he, you know, you would love to have a discussion with Brandon. Absolutely. And I think he'd be great on the podcast too, if he's overseas, obviously. But you know, because he's gotten a lot into the SST style training, time under tension, and like I say, he's like the advanced technique guy. Like, you know, most of what I did was here at this level. What I wish about as I got older, that I had been able to incorporate more of what he does before I got hit with injuries, because that's the only drawback of you know, the way that I was training and always progressing. It's great when you're in your 20s. It's probably okay in your early 30s, but when you try to do it in your late 30s and heading into your 40s, it just does not agree, especially if you've done it your whole life. Yeah. Because there is that natural wear and tear that happens, and then also you've obviously exacerbated it by putting so much load through, and I've kind of found that certain things just, you know, they just go ping. So having to use different techniques as I've gotten older has definitely been I guess it's been a natural progression, because I have been quoted when I was younger saying if I have to do more than 10 reps, I'm never going to train, because I just mentally can't do it. And really where that was coming from was because to do 10 reps was so mentally taxing because of the way that I was training, that I wouldn't have been able to do 15 reps. Like my brain would have probably just like gone onto flatline or something. So, you know, I say a lot of things out of context when I was younger, but now as I train, I went through a phase of enjoying doing a lot of supersets and higher reps and everything, because my body was so fit. Like my muscles had got so fit over the years.
You have to keep challenging them. I think that's the time and the place where you do have to become resourceful. But again, it's the context, and whether young people, or not even young people, but people maybe who are newer, beginner, because you can be a beginner and later, but you'll it's like respond, do the basics, you'll get so much, and when you need to, use that tool.
Exactly.
But don't use the tool for the tool's sake. You know, people want to come in and do drop sets, supersets, occlusion training, all this, and it's like, there's a time and a place for that, and it's probably not right now. Like, why not just get more from, like, the low-hanging fruit? Get all the low-hanging fruit.
Exactly. When you've exhausted that, go for it and look for those next things. But because that, to me, those basics are really what built the foundation, you know, and that the foundation that lives here, I can train with half the amount of weight and the muscle is not going to go away. Obviously not going to be at the size that it was, but it's definitely hanging in there a lot better than, like, because I didn't know what was going to happen in my future. Obviously I start training and everyone says, the muscles are going to turn to fat when you get older, and obviously, you know, physiologically that's not going to happen. You know, I wasn't silly enough to buy into that myth, but at the same time you're thinking, okay, but if my muscles relaxed, it's going to look like it's fat because it's not as tight anymore, and all those things run through your head. And am I going to gain weight because I'm going to want to keep eating like when I was a bodybuilder? Am I going to be able to control that part of it? So there's a lot of things that can happen, and obviously, you know, now I enjoy a lot more functional fitness, a lot more cardio, and I do a lot lot more different things. I even did my first stretch class last night. Oh, nice. Yes.
How are you feeling?
Good. I felt really, really good after.
It's humbling, isn't it?
I started out very well, because they started on hamstrings, and I had very flexible hamstrings. So I think the instructor was kind of like, because I ran out of ladder to stretch down. He's like, oh, you've run out of ladder. And everyone else was like up here trying to stretch. So he's probably thinking, shit, she's flexible.
Not bad for a bodybuilder.
And then we went to quads. And he was like, is that a stretch? And I'm like, it's very painful. I was literally like, they have these bars and how many bars you go back.
Oh, right.
And he had it on 3, so that was, and then you're supposed to, like, I don't know, put your glute under and tilt this, and I was kind of like upright like this, going, and that the other leg I had to go like one more spaced out because it couldn't handle it. He was like, you're not supposed to be in that much pain.
Like, hey, quite dominant.
Oh god, but and I recognise that, because whenever I get a massage, I'm like, don't touch the quads, because they've been very, very tight. Hamstrings, I've always had flexible hamstrings from a teenager before weights, but the quads not. But what surprised me was my lats, and it felt like I had chunks of wood instead of muscle, because they were just like
Yeah,
didn't want to
the
stretch.
lats are a big culprit functionally for a lot of people. That people don't really understand the role of the lat and how it can restrict and cause a lot of immobility and pain around other joints, especially the shoulder and even bicep and things like that. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, so they're definitely that was surprising, but it was something that I had made a commitment to do because
Good.
I struggle to do those things on my own, but I literally had this picture in my head that it was going to be like a room of people on mats doing stretches.
Yeah.
But it was equipment, and it was real. Like I've seen in some of the gyms in America, they have the stretching racks and the little diagrams and that, and I haven't seen them in any of the gyms here. I don't know if you've seen them in the gyms here.
I think in more advanced gyms, sometimes in the bigger cities, they've got a couple of them, but
but
it's not quite as advanced. In Australia, it's a bit more traditional. I think maybe Virgin Active have got a few things, but like, people that are kind of on the forefront, or the international-based gyms.
Yeah, because it's like a standard thing in a lot of the gyms in America. So I, get on the stretching cage and, but I don't really know what I'm doing. So that was why I figured I better learn. And as I said, this equipment was different to what I've even seen, because they have like the bendy things so you can bend, stretch your back that way and stretch that way and do all these other bits and pieces. So I'm doing that once a week. So I'm going to see how I go because I just know I do so much through the week, which binds my body up.
Yes.
And, massages are kind of cool, but if you don't have the right masseuse, they can be a bit just like ho-hum. So you want someone who's actually getting in there and releasing, but this felt great. So
there you go. Yeah, I'm sure it will be. I always say people who do more strength, more flexibility. People who do more flexibility probably need more strength. It's finding that kind of thing that balances you out, especially like, as you said, you get older. You've done so much of this. It's like maybe we need to do a little bit of that.
Yeah, and that's the thing
Easier said than done.
Well, it's that thing too, and this is for people who are older, who've trained a long time, need to be mindful of the fact that because we're strong in certain areas, our body will do everything that it can to protect something and use what it's got. So, for example, my TFL gave me a lot of trouble because my glute was not activating properly. But my TFL was just like, oh, that's all right, we've got it. We'll just take all the weight here. Yeah. But then it comes a point in time where it's not supposed to take that kind of weight.
Correct.
But a normal person or a person who hasn't trained will be straight away like, oh, I have a problem.
Yes.
Whereas me, it's like a problem is a long way down the track. Yeah, because the body just does what it needs to do. And, same thing, our stabilizer muscles are not always as developed as bodybuilders because a lot of what we do is very linear. We're pushing the bench press and we're doing that. We're not working from a lot of different angles and things. So that's a thing where, particularly when your focus is growing as much muscle as possible, it's like, why would you worry about those little unseen muscles? Because they're not going to enhance how you look on stage. So you want to maximize that, and that's what you're training for. And my other big learning that's come out is the fact that I never liked a hip, like my upper glute meads, because of how it looked on stage, and then have realized or found out that that's actually a major stabilizer muscle for walking as you get older. So why do a lot of people fall when they're old? Is because they don't have the strength up here. So that's gone back in the program.
There you go.
So different goals as you get older, and always trying to keep that in mind. So what was important at 30 or when I was competing is now no longer important. It's nice if you look nice, but it's not the goal. The goal is more functionality, power, flexibility, agility, balance. Balance is a huge fitness component as you get older because old people fall over.
It is, and it's sad because a lot of them, people go, it's a fall. It's like, yeah, but a fall when you're that age can be, you never recover and you die. Like, that's a very brutal, sad truth.
It is,
because some people have just no strength at all. But to circle back to you were in the gym, you were training with your friend, and you built up, you obviously started competing there?
Yeah, well, actually, sorry, yes, so going way back then. Sorry. So I actually went on exchange. I went on a student exchange. So she kept training. I went to Brazil, but I kept training. I got to the place where I was living, and I said to my host family, I weight train, and they're like, oh, that's great, we've got a gym in the apartment. And I've gone in there, and it was like this kind of, imagine a universal machine, but it had rope, it didn't have cables or wires, so this thing was sticky as anything. You couldn't train on it, but they were like, oh, so proud of this gym.
Oh, you were like, thanks, great.
But they had this magazine about São Paulo. I was in São Paulo, Brazil, so it's a big city. And every Sunday, this magazine about everything in the city would come out. And I found this advertisement for a gym nearby, like relatively close, called Competition. And I was like, can I train there? Can I train there? So they made me wait a month until my language skills are enough to not get myself in trouble.
Jesus. What language is it?
Portuguese.
Oh, fair enough. Well, you did well in that time.
Yeah, well, no, so I was allowed to go to the gym, and again, just, how things work out is the guy, one of the head trainers there, he was really close with a guy called Luis Otávio Freitas, who was the only professional Brazilian male bodybuilder at the time.
Right.
So he was competing professionally in America, but he'd come up with him, trained with him in the gyms. So he knew how a bodybuilder was supposed to train. So again, it's just like pure luck.
Perfect.
Throughout the program that they wanted to give me, because it was a if you can imagine, like Brazil has some very flash, very top notch kind of stuff. So this gym was like all the they had wonderful aerobics rooms, but you had to get a fitness assessment done like every 6 weeks or something, and they give you a new program, and you couldn't train without that.
Right.
So I had to do like all these VO2 max tests for that, which I didn't care about, but I had to do it. And he'd get the program, then he'd just like throw it away and give me the bodybuilding program. So, but he would literally, I'd come in and he'd like give me my program kind of on the spot, but he knew what I wanted because the goal was to compete, and I kept that year training, under that kind of principle of the same kind of progressive overload principle, and a few more exercises, because he obviously knew a few bits and pieces, and a bit more about nutrition of what bodybuilders ate and stuff. So I was really, again, just like stroke of luck that I happened to be in that massive city in a place where this guy knew the only bodybuilder in the whole of Brazil. Brazil's obviously changed a lot, and they have a lot of bodybuilders coming out of there now, but back in that era, this is like 1988 and 89, and that it wasn't common. It was actually like what the poor people did. So I was, my family was kind of like, my host family was a bit like suspect on me wanting to be a bodybuilder.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Which is kind of funny. But I got back to Australia, and I thought I'd done really well. And then my friend was like, Jesus, she had grown so much. Yeah. And I because I was feeling like, I had all this progression and everything. And she had really, really grown. So I was like, oh my goodness. But, I had to finish my high school, so I was not going to compete.
How long were you there for?
Just a year. It was a full year exchange.
Yeah, that's a decent amount of time,
Yeah. So, I got back. She'd grown a lot. I had another year of school to finish, because I wasn't going to try to do both. Yes. But I had this goal that there was a comp in like the February. I was finishing school in November, so that would give me pretty much the whole summer to prep. Perfect. Which I did, but again, I just kept on training towards that, and did my first comp in 1991, I think it was. Yeah, Bendigo, and then we went up to Broken Hill. I don't know if anyone remembers Pro Hart. He's this famous Australian artist. Pro Hart. He used to paint all like the Stuart Desert peas and the real kind of bright. He lived in Broken Hill, so it's very desert up there. But for some reason, he had gotten, like his family or something had really gotten interested in bodybuilding. And he hosted a competition all the way out in Broken Hill. So that's cool. Yeah, it was very cool, because it was like, oh, okay. So we all piled on a bus. There was about 9 or so of us, and Shani Schmidt, the great Australian Samoa via New Zealand bodybuilder, he was guest posing at that show, so he was on the bus with us. And a lot of the from the time, I think like Matt McLean, he was you maybe remember him from winning a heap of Masters comps of the more recent years, but that was when he was 22 or something, kind of coming up through the under 80s. And there was just it's just kind of like a lot of history. Obviously Tony Doherty organised that whole thing, so that's going back to 91. And what happened was I did the comp. I didn't do very well because I really didn't have that much muscle. Yes. But what it was I realised there was such a process to it. There was 3 months where I had, dieted and done all this cardio and looked at posing routines and learned how to pose and done all of this stuff.
What categories existed back then?
Female bodybuilding.
So it was just like one category.
There was one category.
Right. So it was was it just men's bodybuilding and females? That was
it? They had masters and juniors. So there was
like age groups or like
not at the small shows. Like I think they had weight categories at majority of the shows. So they would have like men's under 70, under 80, under 90. I think even at that stage they maybe just had over 90. Sometimes they had over 100, but not many people in that category, tall guys and not much muscle, but, and then female bodybuilding. And then that very year was when they introduced what they called body shaping. but it wasn't in alignment with the rest of the IFBB. So IFBB
Was it still like just bikini from the get-go?
No, so body shaping was trying to bring the fitness element in.
Oh, okay.
So it was kind of, because I think in IFBB fitness came first, then figure came, and then obviously bikini came, and then now wellness, physique, and then wellness.
I was trying to keep up with it.
So there's so many come in, but yeah, back then it was very simple. But what the concept was, and again, this was unique to Australia in that Carol Graham, who was, they ran pretty much Australia, she was an advocate of like anti-muscle on women. Like she really did not like muscle on women. Yeah. So she was kind of like, oh, the sport's going too far. So she wanted to bring in something, and she brought in this body shaping, but it didn't align with the rest of the world because they didn't have such a thing in the world level or America or anywhere else. So so she just kind of created this thing. And I think they were just trying to be like less muscled female. So it wasn't really well defined what it was meant to be. And then I think the world brought in fitness. So then obviously they brought fitness in and ditched the body shaping category. But so it was around for like 2 years or something. So they were kind of introducing it and trying to say, okay, this is the difference between, bodybuilding and body shaping. But at an amateur level back then, there really wasn't that much difference. Like, it's probably very unfair because at that level, like, people haven't really developed to the point where there's a big differentiation. And obviously now there's physiques crossing into bodybuilding, and bodybuilding's dropping back into physique, and it's all just so mixed up because of each individual person. But that was my choice. Like, there was bodybuilding, there was only bodybuilding, but then I moved to Melbourne to start my degree, start my studies, and I went, and this is again just how stuff happens. Went to the gym nearest to my house, which is a little gym called, I can't remember what it was called now actually, but in Church Street, Richmond. There's this little gym there, and there was a guy who was he competed for NABBA a lot. So he was a master, but he was pretty good in the medium tall category or something, I think they called it. And so he sort of latched onto me because he's like, oh, you like bodybuilding? Like, you train with me. okay. And he kind of took my training to another level because I'd always been following the magazines and, doing the 3 sets and everything. He's like, no, you got to do 4 sets. And he kind of like pushed me. Expanded
the mind a little bit to outside of what the prescription was. It's like, oh, you can do a little bit more or a little bit here and there.
Yeah, and he, he had a very definite routine that he followed, and we trained, literally 6 days a week, 3-day body split across 3 days, repeat that cycle.
Yeah.
And when I first started training with me, he goes, oh, we do a light cycle and we do a heavy cycle. And then I realized that they were just all heavy cycles. We didn't... There was no light because he'd be like, "Oh no, I feel like going heavy today."
Well,
so there was no.
So it was meant to be like a hypertrophy and a strength or something, but we
ended up just like, no, you can go heavier today.
Just smash it. Fair enough.
So he was like, I shouldn't say old because he was only like 40 something at the time. But when you're 18, he seemed old. He'd kind of come at it late. But he was competing NABBA, so he kind of drew me into NABBA, and he'd go along. He started prepping me, and we had so many arguments because he knew nothing about nutrition. Here's me studying a degree of nutrition, and he was the one of the you got to eat the green apple because it's the green apple, and because it was sour, he thought it had less sugar, but green apples actually have like a gram more sugar than red apples.
It's just like you wanted the Granny Smith apple. But it's green, and that's more healthy association than red, and it tastes less sweet.
Red's sweeter, so there's more sugar. It's actually the opposite, and the only reason I know that is my dad, was a plant nutritionist, so he actually had all the the breakdowns of what nutrition plants needed and what was in plants. He's like, no, actually, Christine, it's the red apples have less sugar.
There you go.
Not that it's significantly less, but hey, every gram counts when you're getting down to the wire there. Exactly. But yeah, he was just very, very behind. He kind of had learnt from somebody, and that was all he knew. He also, what he did wasn't what he preached. So he was one of those people that kind of liked to see how hard he could make it for somebody, whereas he himself was not doing the same stuff. So we ended up like training for a couple of years, but parting ways. But the nutrition side of it, I'd just be like, no.
I'm not doing that.
But it was good for that learning, I guess, that process of a more, like, he kind of taught me how to eat more in the off season, because it's always this.
I was going to say, there's people you meet over your career and you go, I almost think back and go, this person taught me this principle, or this person highlighted this principle to me, and it's not like I was going in trying to get something from somebody. It was like, it was just, okay, this was an interaction, a friendship, whatever it was, and it's like, they really highlighted to me progressive overload, or they really highlighted to me the importance of nutrition or calorie deficit. It's interesting how you go through. It's not like that for everyone, but I think about that in my training career a lot. I'm like, oh yeah, that person really solidified this. Didn't have a clue about that, but that I'm really grateful for that experience of learning this.
Yeah, and I think that's what I loved about that era as well. I must say it was the pre-coach era, so your knowledge did come from the OGs, and I remember there was this one guy at the gym that, because my training partner, the old guy, he ended up opening a gym in Melbourne, like not far from where the other gym was, called Muscle and Body Shape. And he'd taken equipment from another gym which had been called Muscle Shape. I don't know. I can't remember what it was called now. But he added the Body Shape because there was a conflict over the guy owned the trademark to the name or something. But he basically, that had been the gym to train at. He had taken all the equipment when it closed down and he had it in storage. So then he'd always wanted to open a gym. So then he opened this gym, and I was a part of that, kind of like running the desk and stuff like that while I was studying and everything. But there was a guy who trained there. His name, I think we used to call him Jimmy the Greek or something. He was a big Greek guy, massive legs. Like, this dude, he just trained for fun now, but had competed, had always got super shredded, majorly striated. And some of his, peaking principles and, just keeping it very simple and trying to not to divert from the food that you had been eating through most of your show and stuff, and just kind of not shocking the body, but just his little tricks that he had kind of done on day before comp and stuff and that, and incorporate those little ideas, but really that principle of don't overcomplicate it. Because I do see people on, peaking, trying to do all this weird and wonderful stuff, and then they're putting things in their body which they haven't digested for 3 months, and all of a sudden they wonder why they end up with stomach problems and bloating and all these things which, when you're on stage, you just want to feel comfortable. Like, you don't want to be worried that, that hurts, I can't flex my ab properly because I feel bloated or something. So there's, from the competition side, there's so much to stage that people maybe don't think about. And one of those things is that, feeling comfortable and confident, not feeling like you need to do something else or that you can't move properly or something. So that all shows on stage. Like, if you're not feeling that, sitting in the audience looking at somebody, you can tell when someone's in discomfort or not happy or not enjoying being up there, and that as a audience member makes me feel very uncomfortable. So I always think on stage, like, I want to make people feel comfortable looking at me. I want to feel how much I'm enjoying this, rather than like, oh my god, my stomach hurts. And
it's very true. And again, it's like common sense, but it's not common. It's for like, people do everything and then they just change everything at the end, and I'm like, why would you do that? I mean, like, even professional athletes who travel, I like the performance nutrition side of things, and it's probably more than you need to know about nutrition for any given person, and that just wants to look and feel good. But when we're looking at the best of the best or ultimate performance, we can borrow some of those principles. And something I learned, I was listening to this in prep, and when I was on the plane, and I was listening to Danny Lennon's podcast. Sigma Nutrition's phenomenal, so he talks to all the scientists, and it's too much for a lot of people, but I like it. But I like to derive things out of it and go, I'm not getting caught up in all of the weeds, because generally they're talking about the studies, the literature, the findings, and then it's sort of being able to sort of take the concepts away that are still viable. Because obviously there's still a lot we're constantly researching, and if you look at something in a vacuum, you go, well, that works, but it's like, but they're talking in a very specific context, and then people go, oh, I'm going to use this, and I'm like, stop that. No, you've listened to one podcast, you've cherry picked one bit of information, but anyway.
But we love to do that as humans, because it gives us that certainty and clarity. But
so when I was young, I was like looking at like arginine. I remember buying this arginine. I was like, this is it. I'm going to grow now. I've got this arginine. It's going to be waste of money. Anyway, so you live and learn. But it was about how the continuity and the specificity of food, in terms of, if you depending on the type of where you live in the world and your cultural aspect, you've been eating the same food, and athletes will even bring that. So say they're competing in the Olympics, and they will bring that same food, the same dose, the same quantity, even down to the brand, because they cannot risk especially when you're flying overseas. We were talking about India before we started the podcast. To have something happen, especially when, like, even though it's not to take anything away from physique athletes, but it's like we are not in peak performance condition. Like, we are not our strongest at that point, to a degree. So it's like you look at an athlete that is based on not just aesthetics but performance, but by byproduct of performance, they aesthetically usually look pretty damn good, i.e. sprinters, things like that. And you think, well, but these guys can't afford to have a bad day because like you need to run that distance under 10 seconds. And again, if you've got anything going wrong, and I mean, it's just one less thing. And I was on the plane listening, and I was actually competing at the time, and I was like, that's really simple, but like, and obviously they went into the depth of it, and I was like, but how many people don't do that, including myself? At that point, I'd still made little adjustments, which was unnecessary. And I'm like, no. The mantra is keep it simple a lot of the time, and which is what I want tattooed on my forehead, because it's literally a principle I go back to every day, because I think we all are guilty of it, but especially myself within that, in terms of just and that is the complete irony of nutrition. It can be so complex, but for the most part, it only needs to be simple.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, when you distill it down to the most basic part, it like, if someone understands the complexity, which is, I guess, what you or your coach is for, then when you bring it down to it, at the end of the day, when I look at food, everything is either, it's either a protein, a carb, or a fat. Like, okay, there's some fiber in there, but essentially, on the broader sense, that's all it is. So are you hitting those things? I have this whole thing on food 5 levels of food, which kind of takes it right down to the the performance type nutrients and things like probiotics and whatnot. But just in the basic term of, if someone needs to get something right, then taking care of those basics, protein, carbs, fats, but then taking it that next level, and that's when you start to differentiate between, where am I getting the protein from, where am I getting the fat from, where am I getting the carbs from, and those different the different types of fats, the different types of proteins. We were talking before about the protein and people not understanding why there's different types of proteins, particularly in international proteins range, where we have ones which are for post-workout, we have ones which are for more between meal or night time, because of the different types of protein in them. Because protein is not all, it's not this big group of thing. It's very, very differentiated in terms of where it comes from, how your body digests it, what the amino acid profile is. So then that's kind of like taking it down to the next level, is like, what's the amino acid profile, or what is the that kind of subcategory of food, and then you get into the, like, what nutrients does it contain, because that's one of the things with protein. Again, all of your flesh proteins, I call them, your beefs and your chickens and whatnot, have a place because they have different complement of vitamins and minerals that protein powder doesn't have. But protein has a different complement of vitamins and minerals, and then it has a different digestion rate, and it has different amino acid profile, which is more conducive, I believe, to growing muscle. And that's where, but you can't make all of your food up out of that because of these other things that you need. So it's kind of, as people want to get more and more into it, they can drill down to that level.
Correct.
And then you can start looking at what phytonutrients are in something, which is obviously more relevant to plants. But then in meats and things, there's things like your carnitines, which lives in the meat muscle, and there's CLA, and that's all the little sub differences that are in different types of food. So it's a very complex. And then, as you said, people take things out of context because they do a study on a particular person who, at a particular time, under these particular conditions, and 3 people are in the study. Don't forget that. Like,
exactly. Or it's done on rats.
Or, yeah.
And you're like, right. I mean, they are similar biologically, but they're not that,
Yeah, there's still, but I think that was the point of, we're still learning so much about nutrition and the interaction and how things interact in our body, but at the same time, nothing's changed in the fact of that we need protein, fat, and carbohydrate. Like, if you take it all the way back there again,
you have to start with that, and like you said, and then once you say, okay, can you tick that box? It's like, what's the next thing? And then depending on how far you want to go. But the problem is, people try and start here, or they try and start at that 3rd level, and it's like, well, but that negates the upper echelon, because
you haven't got that part right. Like, if you haven't got that ratio right, whatever's right for you. And that's another, I mean, this is kind of a segue into the age thing. You know, bodybuilding is very much about, you know, the high protein, low fat. I will never say low carb because what on earth are you training on? You know,
Don't get me started.
yeah, how can you lift heavy weight? How can you even have the mental power to lift heavy weight if you're not getting carbs into your system? But then as you get older, what I've found is that I have to eat so much less carbohydrate and more fat. Like the amount of fat that I eat in my diet now compared to when I was competing is, I'm astounded. But it just seems to, it feels better. And I'm very much more now about kind of going with what feels right. And I kind of came about that because I was in a system of I was very routine. Okay, I do this at this time and this at that time and I eat this time. This is how I eat. And then something just was not right. And I was kind of scratching my head like I'm following my routine. I realized that my routine it was the same, but my lifestyle had shifted, if that makes sense. So I was still eating dinner, but dinner might have been at like 6 o'clock and now all of a sudden it was 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Because by the time that fitted into my new routine, or my new lifestyle, and I'm like, I never would have eaten at 9 o'clock at night. Like, am I mad? Like, what am I'm doing something really wrong here. That was a good chance to kind of step back and look and also say, well, I'm eating like, you know, very, very clean diet, eating, you know, low calorie and probably too low calorie. So I'm like, okay, let's switch this up a bit and, you know, let's whack those calories up. Let's change the fats around, but restructure how I'm eating, like with the time. And this is probably where the intermittent fasting kind of thing, I was not really into it, and then I started to kind of read about it and understand it and experiment with it, and I'm like, oh my god, this actually feels so much better. And that kind of shortening that time frame of eating, changing the macro structure, and then just, you know, the structure is the same, I just kind of pushed it back down to not being so late at night, and things started changing in my body.
Interesting.
So and I do think that fat has a lot to do also with like injury and joints and keeping everything.
Gets a bad rap, but like a lot of nutrients do, because the education isn't there.
And that's I think I know we're jumping all over the place again, but nutrition, like you were talking about bodies at the start and how body types are a fashion and what people aspire to and what's good. Nutrition's exactly the same. And I actually did a talk on my Facebook probably a year or so ago. I've been around since the 70s. I remember when Tab was the first diet soft drink, and if anyone can Google Tab and understand what that is, the 1 calorie in a can.
Jesus,
that was
good
like
marketing.
It literally was the first of its kind of any kind of like, you know, diet product. But just all of the fads that I've been through, particularly working in the food industry, that I have seen, to see where it comes and how we tend to like, because people want easy, we dive for the extreme. We always try to hit the extreme, and we end up causing an imbalance. So, you know, we want to go low fat. So I think low fat really was probably the first fad when they took, you know, there was no low fat dairy product. Now, as you say, there's like 0% fat milk, this, that, and the other. Like, strip all the fat out of everything because fat is bad.
Yeah.
And, you know, that I believe came about because we didn't have nutritional panels on our food, but we had calorie counters. And we all figured out that fat had twice as many calories as carbohydrate and everything. So therefore, if you wanted to eat less calories, you just had to cut out fat because that was like causing all these calories. But nobody was looking at the type of fat, what the role of fat was. We were just like, fat's bad, calories.
Yeah.
Want to lose weight. So that was kind of like that first trend. And I remember one of my first jobs was at Uncle Toby's working in nutritious snacks, which is, I don't know, that's a bit of a loose word, but in context of the time, they were nutritious compared to other things on the market. But what I remember doing this presentation and looking at a normal fat product and a low fat product, and because of all the other stuff you had to put into the low fat product, the calories were actually the same. So you weren't really achieving that result of getting lower calories, but you were just eating a heap more carbohydrate. And then what have we done to ourselves? Oh my God, we have so much insulin resistance and we have all of these problems that we created because the body needs to have that fat, you know, to balance the rate that the food's digested and that the carbs hit the system. So it just is a ongoing thing. And then we kind of go to the other extreme and we rip all the carbohydrates out and then we try to put, you know, all fat in and then you're
Seems
missing
to be one or the other.
Yeah, and it like, but I mean, I understand, you know, with the high fat diet, there is a place in people who have ADD, and they're looking at that that whole space of people who have more like I guess an overexcited brain.
Yeah.
The role that can play. Now the reason that it makes perfect sense to me is because obviously carbohydrate has a lot to do with the energy for the brain. So if your brain's already too hyperactive, then you don't need to necessarily feed it so much direct energy. You can maybe feed it a more longer route to getting at that energy. So that
the same
that
for
could be
people
very...
who suffer with epilepsy. It's probably the only like that's the reason why you'd want to go into full like keto kind of style to do it. I will have to stop us only because to time. So we're gonna have to leave it on a mass.
TikTokers, aren't we?
We are, but this is good because I'm loving it, and I don't want to do it a disservice. So I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 because I want to get into. No, I really want to get into your nutritional background, like you said. Like even there, I've just got so many questions. Like even just like where you've worked, what you've done, the studies, talking about the differential, separating it, the qualitative, like where to go to study nutrition. That's a big thing, which I'll have to chat to you. And then we've not even talked about like the conception of international protein and how that's. But anyway, so but I won't ask you the rapid fire questions in the main one yet because I want to save that.
Yeah.
Because that, again, it does deserve a thoughtful answer. So I guess initially, cliffhanger for people, but if people in the meantime want to find out more about you and they want to maybe get in contact with you with any questions or they want to follow along because you've left them with some great thought projects, where's the best place to touch base with you at this point in time?
Okay, there's a couple of best places. I mean, my 2 main ones really are Facebook and Instagram. Be the easiest place. I have Christine Envall, just search the name, it pops up. I do have a couple of different pages on Facebook, but either way, you'll be able to see my stuff.
Yes.
Obviously, I have a lot of videos that I've done over the years talking about, sports supplements, talking about nutrition, heap of content on Facebook. Obviously, Instagram is the more pictorial, cut down kind of stuff, but I do tend to spend more time on there because I enjoy that platform. So people can reach me through there. They don't need to email me or anything complicated like that because it'll get lost with all of my work stuff. So the social media platforms are probably the best way to find me and to find the stuff that I'm doing and talking about and ask questions through that. And then also that gives me ideas for what people want to hear about more of, because
which is going to be good for, I guess, for more content for the future.
Because I struggle with that, as you can see. The nutrition topic is so broad, and people are kind of like, I need to really get a more specific question, and then I can answer that, but I can't answer broad. I'll put all those in the show notes as well, for then the links for people as well. And if people want to hear anything specifically for even muscle talk or the future, the second round 2, they can pop that in there. Because Muscle Talk still, we have like 50 odd episodes.
I was going to say, because you've still got it there now. It's just sort of regenerating
It's just like, it hasn't slowed down. Like, it's still got like a fairly consistent weekly download. People, just new people finding it. The information's timeless, and that's the point.
That's it.
That's
it's
the
factual.
Point. Yeah.
I guess to end on this then, to give people some just takeaways, if there was 3 things that you could offer or advise people to do every day that were achievable, realistic and timely, what would 3 things that you would advise people to do? It doesn't have to be nutrition based, it can be anything from your experience. Just 3 things that you would advise people to do every day to improve their life right now.
Okay, easiest one: sleep. Get at least 7 hours of sleep.
Oh yes, I'm going to play that for people.
So that is absolutely the number one. And I would say move. Like, do some type of activity or movement. Like, you need to do something every day. I like to do weight training. I like to do a lot of different things. But if people find something that they enjoy to do, so not something that it's a real struggle to do, but something that is not, it's got to be something which is taking you further than just going for a walk to your car or something like that. Like, that doesn't count. Do something. There's so much stuff out there, whether it be Zumba classes, whether it be cycling classes, whether it be jogging, bike riding, weight training, cross-functional fitness. Like, there's so much stuff out there. Find something, try a whole bunch of different stuff. So move. And then my third thing is going to be actually do some kind of personal development thing. Move towards your goals. And that's just because I've gotten a little bit more into personal development, become more mindful of what am I actually doing in life and what direction and stuff like that. So I think probably work on yourself. Don't just work on your physical and your nutrition, but actually work, I guess, on your mindset, your internal things, and become a more positive person. Like, that would be always look at something in the positive sense. So when you're goal setting, don't say, oh, I don't want this. Think of what you do want. Think in the positive.
I like it.
So that's my little mantra at the moment.
Sleep, move, educate.
Yeah.
Guys, I appreciate it. Christine, thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to the next one. As ever, guys, remember, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you want to see more of. Share it around. And, of course, we'll see you in that next episode. Until the next one, stay fearless. For those of you who are confused, frustrated, and sick and tired of not seeing the results that you want or deserve, make sure that you click the Apply for Coaching button in the description below and line up a completely free consultation with myself where we can discover if it's a good fit as client and coach and take your health and physique to the next level once and for all.